So sadly, I don't have a guest for you today to listen to. You're just going to have to listen to me. I'm going to give a post-mortem on an interview that was vetoed. This particular man agreed to be interviewed by me, knowing that my podcast is called Catholic versus Muslim. Knowing that the entire point of the podcast is to compare, and more importantly, to contrast my Catholic worldview with his non-Catholic worldview, with his Muslim worldview. He knew that. After 5 months of consistent reminders, have you listened to it? Is it okay to publish? Is there anything you don't approve of? Do you want any further edits? Finally, I think he managed to communicate to me that he just doesn't want Islam being compared with another worldview. Why? Why did he find this threatening? I barely got a word in edgewise during the interview, so what did I say that had such a powerful, damaging impact on his religion? Let's take a look at some of the content and see what we can learn. So I'm listening to the interview now, but about 7 minutes in, I haven't said one word. When I asked him to tell us a little bit about himself, he said, no, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to talk and you're going to listen. So he took control, and for 7 minutes he talked about God, his God and my God, by the way. And everything he said was wonderful and beautiful, and I was enjoying it. And after 7 minutes of praising and glorifying God and making it perfectly clear that God is sovereign, God is perfect, and God is transcendent, and that nothing resembles God, after 7 minutes of that, I said, okay, well, now tell me something I don't know. What is unique about Islam? Because everything you said aligns perfectly with all three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So why don't you tell me now something about your religion that makes it different from the other monotheistic religions? And he just came back to this idea, this monotheistic idea, that God does not resemble his creation. God is transcendent. God is sovereign. God is not a man. And I said, I agree with you. God is not a man. So he started talking about Jesus. Jesus is a man. Yes, I agreed. Jesus is a man. God does not resemble a man. I agreed. God does not resemble a man. But Jesus is a man. Yes, Jesus is a man. I agree. My ways are not your ways, says the Lord. We can't make God in our image. We can't force God into a box or make God conform to our ideas about him. He is transcendent. He is sovereign. He will surprise us. So I was curious if he would actually dig a little bit deeper into what is very paradoxical, namely the Trinity and the Incarnation. What will this Muslim man do when confronted with the mystery of God? Will he bow? Will he prostrate himself? Will he submit? Or will he tell God, no, you can't be a Trinity. You can't incarnate. You can't die for my sins. Is that what he's going to do? I don't know. All I know is that he was baffled by my answer. Because I was atheist for 25 years and had come to God through philosophy, I knew to expect apparent contradiction. I knew to expect paradox because there is no other way. God is necessarily beyond our comprehension. It's the characteristic of God God is incomprehensible, God cannot be named. I thought the Muslims knew this. I'm sorry to say that I did lose respect for Islam because of this interview. Even if it had been approved for publication, and especially because it wasn't. God is controversial. God is not conformable to our human ways and our human ideas and our human categorizations. I thought all monotheists knew that. So I finally relieved the tension a little bit, or I thought I did, by revealing the Catholic doctrine that Jesus Christ is fully God, fully man, and he has two natures, divine and human. And that the human nature is different from the divine nature. I think that goes without saying. I then changed the subject slightly. I asked him to talk a little bit about Judaism from his perspective. What differentiates Islam from Judaism theologically? And the first thing he said was quite shocking to me. I'd never heard it before. I've since looked it up and it's a real thing. Islam apparently teaches that the Jews believe that God has a son, Ezra. Now, we all know about Ezra, but I'd never heard anyone say that the Jews believe in a son of God. Not in any divine sense. I haven't looked into it too deeply, so I don't know exactly what the nuanced teaching is. And I certainly don't know what the Jewish perspective is, but at the next Jew I interview, I'll certainly ask that. He continued talking about the unacceptable teachings of Judaism from his perspective, talking about how God is, for the Jews, an old man up in the clouds, and he sits up there on his throne, and he got tired after the 6 days of creation, and so he laid down in his bed in the clouds and he took a little nap, and he started talking like this, taking at face value what we Catholics understand to be condescension, or another word for that literary technique is attribution. For God, who is pure spirit, all anthropomorphism for the divine nature is condescension in Holy Scripture. Talking in a way that we humans can understand and relate to as finite beings, right? There's no other way to communicate with us other than through attribution when it comes to the unknowable and incomprehensible and unnameable, ineffable, eternal God. I thought that was a given in all of monotheism. So I was surprised by his very low opinion of his fellow monotheists. Another funny thing that he accused the Jews of believing is that Abraham overpowered God intellectually, that he argued with God and that he won the argument. Now, if you don't know that that's condescension, you need to check your monotheism. I mean, I don't even know how to respond to that. I just find that so funny. And of course, no offense is intended here. I love and respect my guest. My mind is boggling that he could be so ignorant about monotheism, given that he's a monotheist. But when I suggested that this is just a literary technique, I challenged him and I said, are you telling me that if I look in the Quran, I won't find any anthropomorphism? I won't find talk of God's tongue or his arm or his hand or his lips or his head or his body, his waist, his breast? Are you telling me that I won't find any of these attributions in the Quran? Is that what you're telling me? The obvious implication of my question being that if there are examples in the Quran of this anthropomorphic language, attributing to God what is human, attributing attributes of the creation to the Creator, if there's even one example of that in the Quran, then we've got a clear case of hypocritical double standard. Because, and again, I'm not attacking this man's character. I'm just saying that from the point of view of Islam, if he's presenting Islam and Islam says Judaism attributes the characteristics of a creature to the creator based on these Bible passages which are anthropomorphic, they don't have a leg to stand on with that criticism if the Quran does the same thing. And I've since found out that the Quran does contain anthropomorphic descriptions of God. So I asked him directly, is there an example in the Quran of this same anthropomorphism? He immediately changed the subject. He started talking about the Old Testament, the Gospels, how Islam respects the Old Testament, Islam respects the Gospels. And my response was, yes, Islam respects them, but they don't exist. Islam clearly teaches that, yes, the holy books are holy, but we don't have access to them. They've been corrupted. Lies have been introduced. They're not inerrant, not the copies that the Jews and the Christians have. And as far as I know, the Muslims don't claim to have the originals. If they did, certainly I think it would make sense to come forward with them, since they are revered, these non-existent scriptures, since they are revered as holy texts of Islam. I think it would make sense to bring them forth if they had them in their possession. But this brought to mind the questions of authority and infallibility, which are so near and dear to my heart as a Catholic. And as a monotheist, I mean, I won't settle for anything less. Even if Christianity turns out to be a false religion, I will not settle for less than authority, infallibility, and indefectibility. So God's religion is the one true religion, and it has to have those three attributes, since God does. So when I asked him about authority and infallibility, I was a little bit surprised to find out that he does believe in infallibility and authority, and they reside in prophet messengers, like Muhammad was a prophet messenger. It's more than just a prophet. So they have the Quran, which is infallible, inerrant. They have Muhammad. They have God, of course. They have angels that are infallible, but they don't get directly involved in transmitting these messages day to day in Islam. The angels, of course, communicated with Muhammad, allegedly. But there's another layer which has to do with interpretation, because Muhammad's no longer here. There are what they call qualified scholars who are able to interpret the texts. Because there's not just the Quran, there's also the life of Muhammad and the writings of Muhammad, his life. This needs to be interpreted. And it has to be interpreted infallibly, obviously. And so the Muslims don't claim to have access to Muhammad directly, but they do have access to his book, the Quran. And they do have access to the life of Muhammad. And they do have wise scholars that can give us the correct interpretation of any question concerning faith and morals. So either that's an infallible Catholic sort of arrangement where there's a living magisterium which cannot err when it teaches faith and morals for the whole body of the faithful, or it's a Protestant sort of outfit where Islam says, look, every truth is in this book, and it's sort of self-evident if you're smart enough. And this is the Protestant idea of private judgment. You go to your Quran and the truth is there. Just go. If God wants you to see the truth is there. And if you have a quarrel with your neighbor about interpretation, look at all the wise men, what the wise men have said. These scholars, the Protestants that I speak with, they're not shy to draw on the wisdom of the fathers, the wisdom of the scholars. They have the freedom ultimately to choose which interpretation to go with, because obviously they're different scholars with different opinions. We've got many, many thousands of denominations in Christianity, and we've got different denominations in Islam. Because without an authoritative, unified teaching body, people will come to different conclusions. So, in any case, the interview continues, and we talked about some interesting stuff, but it's not really relevant to the post-mortem as such, because it wasn't controversial. As I said earlier, the only thing that's controversial is God. We can grasp a lot of philosophical truths, even eternal, unchanging truths, with the light of natural reason. We can. For example, the existence of the God of monotheism, that can be known by the light of natural reason. We can know that he's a mystery. We can know that he's not a man up in the clouds, sitting on his throne, resting after work because he's tired. We can know all of that with our natural reason. We can't know the Trinity that way, though. We need supernatural, divine revelation to know the Trinity. The same thing for the Incarnation and everything that flows from that. The Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Catholic Church, it's one, it's holy, it's Catholic, it's apostolic. We can't know that without divine revelation. We just can't. I do love and respect my guest, and I sympathize with his fear. It would seem to be theologically inevitable that the fear of God for the Muslim is a servile fear. It's not a loving, childlike fear of disappointing a loving and merciful Father. It's because the theology doesn't make sense, because there are contradictions in Islamic theology. There's something off with their God, and because there's something off with their understanding of God, even the smallest error with regard to something that's infinite can be very powerful. And if it's not light, it's darkness. If it's not of God, it's not light, it's darkness. So no matter how much they have in common in their theological understanding of God the Father, if it's not 100% correct, there's darkness. And so I sympathize with the Muslims because they don't have the fullness of truth concerning God the Father. How could they? It's impossible for both Catholicism and Islam to both be right because they contradict each other. They contradict each other on something as central as the nature of the relationship of God to man. We have the Incarnation. They don't have that. That is no small affair when it comes to the fear of God. We are commanded to have the fear of God, but it means something quite different to us. Because of the Incarnation, because of the Trinity, because of the redemption, because of our understanding of original sin, because of our understanding of salvation, because of our understanding of grace, all the puzzle pieces fit together. It's so comforting. But if you're alone in this great dark universe on this tiny planet and God is nowhere to be seen, that's lonely. That's scary. No, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it's only the beginning for the Christian. Because when you are afraid to displease God and you start to want to please God and you run into his loving arms, the fear's gone. Perfect love casts out fear, as St. Paul famously said. And it's true. You go into the physical human arms of Jesus. There's no fear unless you're Judas. Don't be Judas. Be like a little child. We need to renounce ourselves and we need to go to God. We need to trust in God. We need to love God as a child loves his father. So if there are any Muslims that are out there listening, if you practice your faith, if you love your faith, if you know your faith, if you know who you are and what you believe and why you believe it, please get in touch with me. You don't need to know who I am. You don't need to know who Jesus is. You just need to know who you are and what you believe. You don't need to know everything that you believe. You just need to know the core, essential, foundational beliefs that make you say yes to Islam. Every Muslim should know that. Just as every Catholic should know, why are you a Catholic? What is it that you believe that makes you a Catholic? What is it that the Jew believes that makes him a Jew? And once you know what it is that you believe, why do you believe it? Many things that I believe only on authority, only. The Jew and the Muslim are no different. There are many things that we believe because our religion that we choose to believe teaches us to believe that. And I think that's rational. I think that's sane. I think that's healthy. And I think we don't have a choice. We are finite, fallible creatures. We need to be sincere and evaluate reality and look at some fundamental questions and come to some conclusions. The only alternative is agnosticism, and that's untenable philosophically. We have to commit. Everyone makes a leap of faith. So if you're a Muslim and if you're listening to this and if you have something to say, as long as it's about the truth, get in touch, please. And of course, the same goes for every other worldview. If you're a Scientologist listening to this, if you know who you are, what you believe, and why you believe it, get in touch. Please. Not because I have anything for you, but because you have something to share with my audience, which is admittedly small right now. But I'm inviting you. I'm your fellow man. I'm your neighbor. And I'm inviting you to talk about the truth. There's no higher reason needed. Your brother is asking you to talk about God. Your brother is asking you to talk about truth. Your brother wants to get to know you and who you are, what you believe, and why you believe it. It's that simple. And there are many people listening. There are not many people listening, but there are some people listening. And even if there's one person listening, if they can be moved by your story, if they can get a little bit closer to the truth because of your journey and because of your conviction, because of your love of truth, isn't that valuable? I think so. And I always wrap up my interviews with a message for those who need hope. Always. And everyone surprises me. There's no preparation for any of my interviews, ever. I sit down with someone and I start asking them basic questions, the same questions every time. Who are you? What do you believe? And why do you believe it? Then at the end, I surprise them. I put them on the spot and I ask them to talk to you, the audience. Find something to say to that nameless, faceless stranger out there. And I'm always surprised by what they have to say. You don't know the depths of compassion that lie in someone, but you can get a little glimpse if you just ask. Ask someone to reach out with words of advice, comfort, consolation, inspiration, hope. And you might get a little glimpse of something unique, something powerful, something moving. So since I don't have a guest today, in the spirit of Catholic versus Muslim final thought, I guess what I would say to anyone that's out there listening today is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the truth. And whether you believe in God or not, don't be afraid of God. Don't cower in fear like a slave. He's infinitely lovable. And if the idea of God doesn't appeal to you, start with truth. That's where I started. I can sympathize with the atheists. I was atheist for 25 years. I can sympathize with many, many worldviews. I've dabbled. Our hearts are restless until they repose in God. So my restless heart wandered all over the place. And I dabbled. And I was seeking truth, even if I didn't know it. And I don't think there's anyone out there listening now that isn't seeking the truth. We are made for truth because we are made by truth. So if you're honest with yourself, and if you love truth, and if you give yourself to that love, and don't hold back, even if you're an atheist, as I was, give yourself. Fall in love. God is good.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask.